Freilichen Chanukah to one and all. Today's class is dedicated by our dear friend and a long-time participant, Reb Shlomo Kaller, in memory of his grandmother, Le'il Nishmas Hensha Bas Reb Yisrael Usher, whose yahrzeit is the 18th of Kislev. She passed away Chai Kislev Tovshin Daled Mem. That's 1983. And also in honor of Reb Shlomo's birthday on Zois Chanukah. Happy birthday, Reb Shlomo, Yom Haledet Sameach and Ashnas Hatzlacha, Begeshem uberuach gam yachad la'arichis yamim v'shanim tovos, b'tov ha'nira v'ha'nigla, with menuchas ha'nefesh, u'menuchas ha'guf. Okay, so in honor of Chanukah, we're going to begin a new mimer today. It's a Chanukah discourse, a Chanukah mimer. And I want to thank the Kaplan family for making the copies. I want to thank Rabbi David Kaplan, Rabbi Yosef David Kaplan, and his son, Rabbi Zach Shnei Zalman Kaplan, for making the beautiful copies last night. Yeshikoyach, yes. This is a mimer that the Rebbe said, the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, Shabbos Parshas Miketz, Shabbos Chanukah, Shabbos Mevarchim Tevis, Tovshin Lamed Aleph, which means the end of 1970. Tovshin Lamed Aleph is 5/7/31, but in the English calendar would be the end of 1970. And as you can see on the headline, it was said at the Fabrengen of Shabbos Chanukah, which would be like this Shabbos, Tovshin Lamed Aleph. So we'll learn this mimer, and Be'ezer Hashem, we'll finish it over Chanukah Bli Neder. Like every mimer, every discourse, it begins either on a pasuk, or usually either a pasuk or a mimer chazal, something from Gemara or Medrash. So this, he begins actually the mimer quoting the whole piece in Gemara about Chanukah, which is a Maseches Shabbos. The sugya of Chanukah is a Maseches Shabbos. Right? We all know there's no Masechta Chanukah. There's no tractate of Chanukah, which is a very interesting question. You have a tractate in Mishnayos and Gemara for every single holiday. We have Maseches Shabbos, which deals with Shabbos. We have Maseches Psachim, which deals with Pesach. We have Masechta Yuma, which deals with Yom Kippur. We have Masechta Beitza, which deals with Yom Tov, every Yom Tov. We have, of course, Masechta Rosh Hashanah. We have Masechta Megillah, which deals with Purim. So it's not just Masechtas of biblical holidays, it's also rabbinic holidays. Megillah is not a biblical holiday. It's a holiday from the Nevi'im, from the prophets, from the Chachamim. But you have a whole Masechta, Maseches Megillah. There's no Masechta Chanukah. This is an old question. It's not like Chanukah doesn't have as laws. It has as many laws as Purim. Purim has halachas. Masechta Megillah is not a long Masechta. Masechta Megillah is three, Mishnayos is 3 prakim, 3 chapters. You could have had for Chanukah also. The Rambam in Mishnah Torah, which has all the halacha, has Hilchas Megillah and Chanukah together. Milchah Gillah, he put them together actually, because they have a lot of similarities. But in Mishnayos there's no Masechta Chanukah. Where are the halachas of Chanukah? The halachas of Chanukah were put primarily, in Mishnayos even Chanukah is barely mentioned. It's mentioned in Baba Kama, mentioned very little. It's put in Pesachta Shabbos, in the second Perek of Shabbos, B'mem Adlikin, B'mem Adlikin. Over there, there's a few pages that are connected to Chanukah, the laws of Chanukah. Lighting the menorah, where you light it, how you light it, when you light it, if it gets extinguished, different halachas about lighting. Over there, Shabbos Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, the Gemara says the following, and that's how the mimer begins. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbana, my Chanukah, what is Chanukah? That's the question. That's that language of the Gemara. My means what in Aramaic? My Chanukah, like Mahu Chanukah. What is Chanukah? Rashi says over there, Al Ezen Neis Kavua. Why was it established? What happened? What is this whole holiday called Chanukah? And the Gemara answers, the Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, B'chafei B'Kislev, on the 25th day of Kislev. It's always nice to learn when it's that day. You know, today's the 25th of Kislev. B'chafei B'Kislev, Yom de Chanukah, begins the days of Chanukah, Tamnaya Inun. They are 8 days. Tamnaya in Aramaic are 8. So they are 8 days. V'chuli, etc. The Gemara continues, Shekshenichnasu Yavanim lahechal. When the Syrian Greeks went into the Heichal is the inner sanctuary of the Beis HaMikdash where the menorah was. Timu kol hashmanim shebeheichal. They impurified, they defiled, they contaminated all of the oils that were in the Heichal, in the sanctuary. And when the kingdom, the government, the kingdom of the house of Chashmonai, the house of the Chashmonaim was of course the family of Matisyahu, Ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol, who's called the Chashmonai, and all of his children and their entire family. when they prevailed, v'nitzchum, and they were victorious over the Syrian Greeks, and he says in parentheses, and it wasn't just a regular victory, but as we say in Ala Nisim ba'ofen, sheraftas ribam, nakamtas nikmasa masarta gebedim biad chalashim v'rabim biad matam utmeim biad tayrim Hashem biad tzedek v'zedi biad ois kisher secha. Everything we say in Ala Nisim. It wasn't just a real small victory. It was a victory we say that you, Hashem, fought for them, and you are the one who took vengeance for them, and you surrendered the strong in the hands of the weak, and the many in the hands of the few. So this was a victory of titanic proportions. People don't realize that you had only a few thousand Jews, fighters, fighting over the strongest army in the world. And one of the strongest armies in the world, the Syrian Greeks, which numbered probably close to 50 or 100,000 troops. And here you had a very small group of Jews that defeated them. And then, till your children came as a Phineas Echalacha, they cleaned out the sanctuary because the Greeks erected a statue of Zeus in the Beis HaMikdash. I don't know if you know. They wanted the Jewish people in the Beis HaMikdash to have a statue of Zeus. They also had the Kohen Gadol who worked for them. He was a Hellenist. He was a Messiavin. Slaughter pigs as karbanis. They slaughtered chazerim in the Beis HaMikdash. So the whole Beis HaMikdash was defiled. It was contaminated physically with their statues and their idolatries and paganism, and spiritually. So Pinu Sechach, they had to clean it up. V'tirus Mikdashach, they cleansed your Beis HaMikdash. V'idliku neides b'chatzos kachech, and then they lit candles in the courtyard, in your holy courtyards. Kenusachat tefillah, like we say in davening and alanis. So back to the Gemara, back to Maseches Shabbos, when the Beis Hashmonai fought back and triumphed, Batku, they searched, they scrutinized, they checked. They found only one jug of oil that was laying there with the seal of the high priest, which means it was his seal on the jug, which meant that nobody opened it, nobody touched it. So therefore nobody had contact with it. However, there was only enough oil to burn for one day. A miracle occurred in this jug, and they kindled the menorah from this jug of oil for 8 days. Lashana Acheres, says the Gemara, the next year, the following year, 1 year after the miracle, Kavum, the sages established these days, Vasom, they turned them into Yamim Tovim, good days, holy holidays. Bahalel v'Haidah, expressing itself in two ways. Halal, which means praise, and Haidah, which means gratitude. And those are the two things we do on Chanukah. We say Halal every day, and Haidah, we express gratitude. We express gratitude through Alanissim and davening and benching, and of course, through the kindling of the menorah. That's the end of the sugya. That's the piece of Gemara that answers the question, my Chanukah. The Gemara asks, my Chanukah, and it tells this story about the victory that was followed by the miracle of the menorah, and the next year it becomes a Yom Tov for 8 days. The questions that are addressed about this are already well known in the Sefer Torah, which is the Alter Rebbe's Torah, and the Drushim, the discourses afterwards, after Torah, particularly the Maimer that was said by the Rebbe Rayatz 30 years ago, because this is Tavshan Lamed Aleph, 1970. So 30 years ago was 1940. In the Maimer, shortly after he came to America, escaped the Nazis. My Chanukah, Tavshan Aleph, 1940. The Tzarech Lahavin, the question is, it's a strange thing. You would think that the opening of the sugya on Chanukah should be my Chanukah, but there's already a whole discussion in the Gemara earlier about the halachas of Chanukah. So obviously you're assuming everybody knows what Chanukah is. Already a page earlier he starts discussing what type of candles you're allowed to use on Chanukah, and what type of wicks and what type of oil. And then there's a question of how many candles you light each night, because there's an argument between Bishami and Basilil. And what happens if you light the candle and it gets extinguished. All these halachas are already earlier in the Gemara. And it's like after you discussed all this, suddenly, by the way, let's go back to the basics. What is Chanukah? Well, if nobody knows what Chanukah is, so then you should have done that in the beginning. Elamai, you assume everybody knows what Chanukah is. And that's why you didn't do it. So suddenly in middle, like after discussing everything, he says, like, by the way, my Chanukah. This should be the opening. To add more to the question, to explain it more. So the truth is, the question is, not why it says it later and not earlier. Why it says it at all. Anyone learning Gemara, which was written close to 2,000 years ago, knew what Chanukah is. Chanukah is well known. My Purim. Nowhere in the whole Gemara does it say my Purim. What is Purim? My Pesach, my Shavuos, my Sukkos. Doesn't say anywhere. Why not? The answer is everybody knew what Purim is. It's so much part of Jewish life, of Jewish ritual, from father to son, every generation. Everybody knew what Purim is. Everybody knew what Pesach is. My Chanukah, they knew what Chanukah is. You see also many things, doesn't have a special tractate or even individual laws about it. If you look in the Mishnah, it doesn't say all the halachas. There's many blessings, it doesn't say how to say it, or the details of the halachas. It doesn't say anywhere in Mishnayos, for example, the nusach hashben esra, or that you have to have chazar sashatz. Why not? It's part of Torah Shabbat Peh. You should say it. Yeah, you tell me a lot of other halachas. The answer is lefi shayibu for someone b'fikol v'lo yitzarich lamdam b'yeshivas. The answer is this was so much part of osmosis. It was so much part of Jewish life. Everybody knew it. They didn't have to teach it in yeshiva. By the time everybody came to yeshiva, they knew it all. This is similar to what the Rambam explains in his introduction to Pirush HaMishnayos. The Rambam has an amazing introduction to the whole Mishnayos where he gives an overview, a bird's eye view of the whole Torah Shabbat Peh, how it worked, how it developed, how it functions. Something that everybody should learn. The introduction of the Rambam to Pirush HaMishnayos. At some point in your life, you should learn it. So over there, the Rambam says, there's a lot of proofs in Gemara that when it says Pri Eitz Hadar, it's an esrog. It says in Parshas Emer, Ulekachtem lechem bayom harishon, Pri Eitz Hadar, kapes tmar manaf etzaves v'arvei nachal. You should take on Sukkos a beautiful fruit from a tree. So what's a beautiful fruit? I think cherries are beautiful. Watermelons are also a beautiful fruit. So how do we know it's an esrog? So the Gemara, Meseches Sukkot, Daf Lamed Hey, brings, I think it's 4 or 5 proofs that when you analyze the words Pri Eitz Hadar, you'll figure out it's an esrog. And it's complicated proofs, it's not so simple. One proof is, for example, it says Hadar. Hadar you could pronounce Hadar. Because there's no vowels in a Sefer Torah. So you could say Hadar, you could say Hadar. A fruit that lives. No, every fruit lives. But the Gemara says Hadar bi lanai mishana lashana. There's only one fruit in the world that it lives on the tree. The tree becomes its house. Most fruits, they want to be on the tree temporarily. A certain season they're on, that season changes, they fall off, or they rot away. They can't be there longer. An esrog could remain on a tree for 3, 4, 5 years through all the seasons. It's unique. That's why esrogim could be very small and they could be very big. Why can esrogim be very big? Because they could stay on the tree for a few years and not fall off. In other words, all the climates contribute to the growth of the esrog, and the esrog continues to live there. So it's a remez. Pri Eitz Hadar bilani mishana l'shana. The Gemara gives other remaz and Pri Eitz. It's the only fruit that the pulp and the bark have the same taste. Interesting things over there. It's all rayas. So the Rambam says, how do you know it's an esrog? Maybe you should take a pomegranate, also a very nice fruit. Chavushim are, in Hebrew, what are chavushim? Anybody knows? Quinces. Quince. Huh? So the Rambam says, how do you know not a chavushim or chuli, any other fruit? The Gemara has a language, maybe it's pilpulin, pepper. So the Rambam says like this. Why does the Gemara ask this question? It's not pshat that they had a mistake. People were driven by a mistake and confusing the esrog, and they had to have proofs. No. The Rambam says from Yeshua ben Nun, which means from when they went into Eretz Yisrael till the point when the Gemara was written, every single year they took an esrog. So there couldn't have been a problem. It's like, I know what my father took for Sukkos. He knows what his father took for Sukkos. He knows what his father took for Sukkos. It's not something that happens once in 100 years that there could be a generation that doesn't see it. It happened every single year. Even if you want to say, sometimes there were crises and people couldn't have an esrog, so it happened. So they skipped a year, but it was part of Jewish consciousness, like it is till today. Right? Every child who grows up in a community knows what an esrog is, knows what a sukkah is. Why? Not because they learn it, because it's part of life. It's part of life. Just like they know what Shabbos is, they know what Yom Tov is, they know what Tefillin looks like. That's one of the big questions. How the machlokes of Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam and Tefillin happened. Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam have a huge argument how the Tefillin are set up. There's 4 parshas in Tefillin. The order is a big argument between Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. So we have Rashi's Tefillin, we have Rabbeinu Tam's Tefillin. According to Rashi, Rabbeinu Tam's Tefillin are apostle. It's his own grandson. According to Rabbeinu Tam, his Zayd is tefillin apostle. That's why it says in Shulchan Aruch that Yorei Shemayim should put on both pairs of tefillin. Even though halacha we've paskin like Rashi. But how did the argument happen? And even though not everybody makes tefillin, you have to have people who make it's esrig would be harder because esrig you see. Tefillin you don't see, it's inside the tefillin, you have to know how to make it. But still, the soif from every generation. So this is an old question, how the argument in Arsha ben Tam happened. Yep. One of the answers that's given, Rebbe Reuven Margolius, and others say that the argument happened already in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. Very interesting answer. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't get involved in this. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu had to put on tefillin. The order, they already argued in that generation. So it was already an argument all the generations. And then Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, they were the ones who represented the two streams, but it was already the first generation. So how would anybody know? There were already two arguments. Not everything was solved right away. It's a very interesting answer. But B'negeya Esrig, there's no argument what an Esrig is, yeah? Even in our generation, where you have Reform Judaism, Conservative Judaism, yeah? As I heard my father once tell somebody on the phone, he said, nobody ever heard of a Reform Esrig. The Reform Esrig. They have on the Kaira, some people on the Kaira, some conservative Jews, they put on orange. I don't know if you ever saw. I think instead of an egg, they put an orange. How did that happen? So I heard, I don't know if it's true, but I heard that there was a woman, she was very into feminism. And she came to a particular rabbi in the JTS, in the seminary. I heard it was a Shaul Lieberman. Chazon Ish's nephew, yeah? Chazon Ish's nephew. Huh? I don't know, I heard, and came to her and wanted that they should have women rabbis. So he said to her, we need women rabbis like we need an orange on the Kaira. So what did she do? The next Pesach, she had an orange on the Kaira. So now we need women rabbis. I'll call Banim, you don't have a Reform Esrig. Why don't you have a Reform Esrig? The answer is because if you're already going to do Esrig, what are you going to reform it to? What, berries, blueberries, raspberries, what, oranges? You use an Esrig. So the Rambam says it's not pshat that the Gemara was looking for proof. The Gemara knew what Priyat Hadar is. The Gemara wanted to show how you could see it in the text. That's what the Gemara is doing. It's a different word. It's not like from the Gemara now we know what an esrog is. The Rambam says there was never a question what an esrog is. The Gemara just wants to show you how it's in the text of Chumash, that when you go back to the text, it's all there in the text, hidden in the text. And that's very valuable to show that when Moshe Rabbeinu wrote down the Sefer Torah, he included in the words the whole Torah Shebaal Peh. And this is a big yesod when you're learning these things in Gemara. It's not, nobody was debating whether it should be this or that. It's not a machlokes in esrog, and you don't need proofs from the psukim because it was proof of life. You just want to show it in the esrog. This is the Rambam's point. Yeah. According to this, the Rebbe says, "Vim kein my shaylas haGemara, my Chanukah." So just like the Rambam says this about esrog, which is obviously earlier in history, the same thing. What's my Chanukah? So the first question is, you first start all the halachas of Chanukah, assuming everybody knows it, and then later you say, what is Chanukah? What happened? Why not in the beginning? And really the question is, you don't even have to ask my Chanukah. They knew what Chanukah is. Another interesting diuk is the Gemara says they found a jug of oil with the seal of the Kohen Gadol. It's mashma that this is what saved the day. There was a seal of the Kohen Gadol. You don't see on the meat, the hechsher with the chesamir shel Kohen Gadol. For kashrus of oil, you don't need a Kohen Gadol. Kohen Gadol, you need to go into Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur. Kohen Gadol, you need to do certain things a Kohen Gadol has to do. Kohen Gadol had to bring a carbon, whatever the Kohen Gadol had to do, a few things. For kashrus of oil, you don't need a Kohen Gadol. To tell me that the oil was unscathed and not tummy, you don't need a kohen b'chlal, nothing to do with a kohen. Even to light the menorah, you don't need a kohen gadol, you don't need a regular kohen. The halacha is that even a Yisrael could light the menorah. The challenge is a Yisrael can go into the heichal, but if he had a long stick, for example, outside, he could light it. He'd like it. Hadlakas hamenorah is ksheira bizar. This is even lighting the menorah. Valachas kama v'kama shalinyan kashrus Hashem ain't tzarich b'koyin. To establish the kosher quality of the oil, that it's not tummy, it wasn't contaminated, because oil could become contaminated. It's one of the liquids that can become contaminated and could cause other things to be contaminated. But you don't need a kohen. El tzarich sheyeh chaver haneman al ataras. You need a chaver. Chaver means a talmid chacham, somebody who's not just knowledgeable, but somebody who's scrupulous, who's nizar, who's meticulous in Shmiras HaTorah, in Torah mitzvahs, especially in the laws of Tumah and Tara. There were many Jews that didn't know the halakha. Tumah and Tara is a lifestyle. Today we don't understand it because it's not part of our lifestyle. But in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, Tumah and Tara was literally a lifestyle. It was like a part of, it was like, like davening Shachris and Mincha. It was part of the fabric of Jewish life. And the reason is because the sensitivity to holiness requires Tumah and Tara. In other words, sometimes a person doesn't know what's the difference. Your tummy, but when you're dealing with deep levels of sensitivity, Tumah and Tara is very, very crucial. So this was a major part of Jewish life. So you need a chaver. A chaver is somebody who's an expert and who cared about it, who was neman, who was loyal, who was trustworthy on taras, on pure things that you should have become tummy, like the oil of the menorah. It brings from the Rambam and Hilchas Matami Mishka. You don't need a kohen. It's not about a kohen. A kohen is a certain level of holiness who can do certain avodas in the Beis HaMikdash that you can't have a Yisrael. This has to do with kashrus. It's like you say for a shaychet you need a kohen. You don't need a kohen, you need a shaychet. Somebody to give a good hechsher, you don't need a kohen. You need somebody who's a neman, who's loyal to Allah. That's right. Yirei Shemai. You could say maybe shadiyuk the kohen who lefi shematzu behechel afsha siyas Hashem elahesa behechel ala b'takoa mishama yimevim ma'aseh lahechel shezar asur lekanas sham shre'adayin lo yinegesh yimonu b'chasamar shel kohen gadol. Maybe the Gemara says that nichnasu lahechel, the Yavanim were timu kol hashmanim shebehechel. They contaminated the oil that was in the hechel, and therefore the Chashmonayim, when they won, they found the pach echad shel shemesh sheyimunach b'chasamar shel kohen gadol, because no Yisrael could go into the hechel. There were sections of the Beis HaMikdash that only certain people could go into. The hechel, which is the inner roofed sanctuary where the menorah was, where the table was, the shulchan, where the inner mizbeach was, others didn't. Nobody had access to it besides the kohenim who did the avodah. Even kohenim couldn't just walk in; they can go in to bow or do the avodah there. Now people could see what's happening in the hechel because there were doors that were very wide, so you could see from where people stood. What's called the azara, where women could stand, men could stand, even not kohenim, they could see in the hechel, so you could see what's happening there, but you couldn't go in. So maybe the reason it says hayamunach b'chaysamer shel kohen gadol is because they found it in the hechel, even though they didn't make the oil in the hechel. The oil came from a city called Tekoa. Tekoa had tremendous abundance of olive trees, and they brought it to hechel, but a Yisrael can't go in there. But the Rebbe says you can't say that's the word because then it's not negei kohen gadol. If you want to say once it was brought into the heichal, it had the chaysim of the kohen because nobody else went in. But here it says kohen gadol. Ve'ein loymar shema shekasav shayimunu b'chaysamer shel kohen gadol urak lefi shekach chaysam etzias b'poyel. The kivan shalei negei sheyimunu b'chaysamer shel kohen gadol loyhayu loymar zesahav le'lemim erak shalei nitma. You could say maybe the Gemara says this because that's what happened. You're right. You don't need a kohen gadol seal. It could be a kohen seal. It could be anybody's seal who's a kosher fellow. But it just happened that way. It happened to be that they used the seal of the kohen gadol. So what do you want? You're right. You don't need the seal of the kohen gadol. Even if it would have been the seal of a kosher kohen, it would have been perfect oil. It says that, but in Gemara, everything is b'diuk. In other words, if it's not negei, it should be that way. He could have just said they found oil that they knew wasn't tameh. They knew it wasn't touched. It was the fact that he says means that somehow this was relevant to the inyan. So these are the two issues he brings up, which are of course the vista, the entrance to go into the sugya. The explanation of all of this is he explains in the Maimer of Tavshin Aleph. The war of the Yavanim against the Jewish people was physical, but primarily it was a spiritual battle. There's different types of battle in history. There's a battle that's more of a physical battle, which means your physical existence is bothering me, and that's what I want to fight. But here the main milchama was mostly a spiritual battle. It doesn't mean there was no physical war, there was, but it originated in a spiritual battle. The Rambam says in Hilchas Chanukah, that the Greeks extended their hands to fight and capture their money and their daughters. They wanted their daughters. But the beginning, the genesis, and the main aspect of the war was spiritual. The main idea was not that they wanted to damage the body, the Jewish body, which would be different than Haman, for example. Haman, like Hitler in our generation, the previous generation, the primary was the guf of the Jew. Fakert, they want to destroy. I once heard from the Rebbe that their ambition to destroy the guf was so deep that even after the guf was dead, it wasn't enough. They wanted to destroy every last remnant of the Jewish guf, to burn it until there was nothing left but ashes. That's how deep the Milchama was against the guf. The Rebbe used to say, from here you see the Kedushas HaGuf of a Yid. I know this is mainly the Purim sugya, we're now on Chanukah, but it's kedai to say. The Kedushas HaGuf of a Jew you could see from the Nazis. That's why the Rebbe was that's why he always spoke about how much you have to cherish the guf of a Yid, and you have to help the guf of a Yid. Besides the Ruchni, is the Gashmius itself is already Kodesh HaKadoshim. And if you don't believe it, look at the Nazis, you'll see. If they were so driven by such hate to the guf, it shows you evil knows its enemy. Evil knows its enemy. When you see that the evil was so driven by a satanic craving to destroy every last remnant of a guf of a baby, what does it show you? It shows you Kedushas HaGuf. It shows you the holiness of just the guf itself, without anything else. Without Torah, without mitzvahs, without emunah. The guf is already a lakus. It's a hafla de kinyan. Huh? Yeah. The whole yachas to the guf. It's a holy thing. So the Milchama here was the guf. By Chanukah, the Jews that were Hellenists of Akaret, they liked it. I don't know if you know, but in the time of Chanukah, most Jews were pro the Greeks. It wasn't just a war of Jews against Greeks. Most of the Jews felt that Matisyo and his kids were cuckoo. They were insane people. They were shagoy. Here you have a nice culture. It's not a barbaric culture. They were really barbaric, but like the Jews thought about some Jews thought the Germans were a beautiful culture. Once you get to know them, it's not such a beautiful culture. It's barbaric people. They'll what the Nazis did, it was, you can't imagine, it was scientists, PhDs, they came home at night, they drank wine, they petted their dog, they had beautiful marriages, but during the day they could send children to gas chambers. It wasn't a stira by them. But at the surface, the Yevonim, they were very sophisticated. They had philosophy. They were very into architecture, beautiful architecture, art, physical, the body, prowess, physical development. So the Misyavnim, the Hellenists, felt that it was actually very good for the Jewish people. This is progress. If we adopt them, that's progress. Really underlying everything, there was horrible, horrible evil. But at the surface, it looked very good. So it wasn't only a war of the Jews against their enemy. The Jews, most of the Jews were Misyavnim. I don't know if you know, the Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash, the Kohen Gadol himself, were Misyavnim. They were completely on the side of the Yevonim. So Chashmonayim weren't only fighting a war against the Greeks, they were fighting a war against internal Jewish self-hate and shame. So the battle wasn't against the guf of the Jews. They would even leave the Beis HaMikdash as a museum. They wanted the Beis HaMikdash as a museum, as a nice center. They didn't mind these things. It wasn't to destroy everything that Jews have. It was a spiritual element. It was a spiritual battle. That's what he's saying. We say in Ala Nissim, their main thing was that the Jewish people should forget your Torah, ulahaviram, and take them away from your laws, from the laws of your will. The Levush is one of the great poskim, Reb Mordechai Yafin. He has a sefer called the Levush, which is his own Shulchan Aruch, and he writes over there in Hilchas Chanukah. He says, "Bebiyur atam sheribu yasudas b'Chanukah im reshus shaloi kavam lemishtav v'simcha kamei bepurim shesh b'chiv lebesuma b'yayim ki bepurim hayat tzalos nefashos u'b'Chanukah lo hayat tzalos nefashos ki hayavanim lebikshu nefashos rak ha'achna v'avaras das v'lechein kavam ba'al levoida." Levush says this explains that Chanukah we don't have a mitzvah of mishta and simcha like Purim. On Purim there's a mitzvah to have a suda, to have a feast, to drink. Chanukah, it says they made them days of Halal v'Haidah. Very different. Why? Purim was also salvation. Why? Purim is Mishta v'Simcha, a feast, and Chanukah is Halal and Haidah, lighting candles and expressing gratitude. So the Levush says, by Purim, it was saving the Jewish body. So you celebrate through eating and drinking, which are physical things. But by Chanukah, they weren't looking for souls. If you surrendered to the Yevonim, they were good for you. Again, like you see, wasn't by Purim. By Purim was lahashmid, larigul, abedus, kol Yehudim. Every Jew, even the assimilated Jews. Again, like by the Holocaust, They didn't want to destroy certain Jews. Every single Jew, even if you scream that you don't believe in anything, they still wanted to kill you. But by Chanukah, he says they weren't looking for that. They were looking for hachna. They were looking for surrendering your identity, havaras das, losing your soul. So b'meila, the celebration is a spiritual celebration. It's Hallel, which is more spiritual, Haidah, which is more spiritual. And the Maimer adds, we say in Ala Nisim, he emphasizes the line Gechaf. Could have said that, what do we say? Lashkicham HaTorah, Ulaviram HaChukim, or HaMitzvahs. He says, Lashkicham Torah Secha, Ulaviram HaChukim Tzenecha. They wanted to make them forget your Torah, your will. The Chol Inyan Milchamtam Haya Neged Torah Savaya V'Neged HaMitzvahs Shem Chukei Tzoni Yisborach. Their war was against the Torah of Hashem and the mitzvahs, which are the laws of Hashem. Meaning, V'hainu. So he says something fascinating. The fact that Torah can be brilliant and intellectually stimulating, this, they agreed, they had no problem. Jewish culture can be rich and interesting and intricate and profound, and even a Chachma Gedoyla, gewaldik ideas, no problem. Fakert, they appreciated good ideas. Aval isnagdu al zeh shi Torah savaya. What they couldn't tolerate was the sanctity of it, the kedusha of it, the soulfulness of it, the experience of it as divine. This is what bothered them, as opposed to just as an intellectual concept. Every culture has ideas, every culture has philosophies, and Jews also have their philosophy, and Jews also have their symbolic rituals, and they don't mind that. That's why it doesn't say Lashkicham HaTorah, Ulaviram HaMitzvahs. You could do Torah and mitzvahs. So the Rebbe is saying a word here, that even Torah and mitzvahs, that didn't bother them. What bothered them was a certain type of Torah. Lashkicham Torah Secha, that it's yours. Laviram Mechukei Tzenecha, that it's yours. V'chein binyan HaMitzvahs, shehem mishpatim. It should have said Laviram HaMitzvahs, it says Laviram Chukei Tzenecha. So he says the mitzvahs that are mishpatim, meaning, or HaMitzvahs shein edus. There's mitzvahs that are mishpatim, meaning rational mitzvahs. Edus are testimonial mitzvahs, symbolic, ritualistic. They don't mind. Aber bei mitzvahs the chukim, bei ifin shechukah chakaktik zeh de gezarti lazeh isnagdu. The diuk here is lavida me chukei tznecha. The chukim. What's a pshat chukim? Chukim is, this is Hashem's will. That's the main point of the mitzvah. This was their opposition. V'hainu shekol ha-milchama is neged ha-likus. The milchama was against the experience of a likus, of godliness. Shaloi lahaskir shat Torah hi Torah savaya v'sham mitzvahs im chukei tzoni yisborach. Not to mention that the Torah is Hashem's Torah. That the Torah is truth. That the Torah is, you're touching God. You're touching the creator of everything. Oh, no. Now you're already taking it too seriously. This is this. If it's something every culture has their mishagasim, we have no problem. No, we have our culture, you have your culture, you have your ideas. We'll argue about it, we'll even learn it, we'll even open up in the university a special school. If you have a good sponsor, we'll open a special school and they'll study your culture, gesundheit. You know, in Harvard they have divinity school. So you study different cultures, huh? Yeah. In other words, if it's something that's al pi seichel of the Yevonim, they have no problem. So b'meili you can learn Torah and chichichach maschem u benaschem. It's a lot of wise stuff, gesundheit. The same is true even mitzvahs. As mishpatim and edus, things that make sense, or as cultural stuff, you know, people have traditions, they had no problem. The chiddush was, that what their war was, lashkicham Torah secha, that it's your Torah. Ulavira mechukei tzenecha. In other words, the purity of it, the sanctity of it, the transcendence of it, the absolute truth of it, yeah, that comes from the source of the whole creation. Well, now you're pushing it. That they didn't like. Yeah, which includes exclusivity and utter truth. Yeah, v'yesh leimar, you could say even more. Shebechukim gufa lo yifriya lehem etzem inyan hachukim. He could have said lashkicham teresecha ulahavira mehachukim, not mishpatim, not edus. There's three types of mitzvahs: mishpatim, edus, chukim. Mishpatim, the Ramban says, mishpatim are logical mitzvahs, like don't kill, don't steal. They're logical. You can't have civilization if everybody kills each other. Edus are witnesses, testimonials. It's like cultural mitzvahs. Like you'll make Shabbos in order to have one day of rest, so people spend time with their family. You'll make a holiday Pesach to remember that you were a slave and you were freed. It also makes sense. Chukim are chukim. Chukah chakaktik zeda gezarti. Why do you do it? Hashem said to do it. So you could have said, that's what bothered you. So say, la vida mea chukim. He doesn't say that. He says, the truth is, even chukim didn't bother them. Im hayu chukei basav adam, kamei chukei hamelech shayu gam atzlam. Every king has laws. They don't have to understand it. What bothered them was not chukim. What bothered them was chukim necha. In other words, you could say like this. Sometimes you have a brilliant man, and he tells you to do something, and you don't understand why, but you know that he's brilliant. And if he's brilliant, he has a reason. That didn't bother them. It didn't bother them to say that there's some reason we don't know yet. What bothered them to say is that we don't need a reason. That bothered them. Yeah. In other words, even the Rebbe says, even chukim they didn't mind. They don't mind chukim. I don't care. I could respect that there's things I don't know. You're a brilliant man. Yeah, somebody has guided you well. They have their cheshbainas, and they're telling you to do this. So you have to understand everything. Even a melech has chukim. Not everybody understands. He has his cheshbainas. But somewhere I want that it should fit into my box. It should fit into my rational ego. The union of bittul avida mechukah tzanach, I don't need a reason for it. In other words, the dveikus with the ein soif, which is not in my own terms and definitions, this drove them crazy. Huh? Yeah, the pure ava. It's a relationship. With the relationship itself is the power. For that, you need a relationship with ultimate truth. It's haba hatalia, because to accept a chayk that doesn't have a reason, if it's not God, you taka got to be crazy. It's haba hatalia, understand? The only reason you could say that chukei ritzenecha is of ultimate value is if a taka comes from the source of everything. And that drove them crazy. You don't have a monopoly on truth. In fact, the whole concept of truth was alien to them. Truth is, everything is relative. The way I understand it, the way you understand it, but it's all relative. And because it's all relative, so therefore, what's truth? Truth is what you want. Fine, you can experience it. And this was a very deep war against Yiddishkeit. This was already a very deep milchama. This is not a simple milchama. Huh? That's a good question. How did humanity develop such a hatred to God? Well, it's a hatred to themselves as divine. It's a hatred to themselves as divine. It's a hatred towards the self as bittul. It's the ego. Ego is easing God out. It's the big question of what's at the center of reality. If at the center of reality is Hashem, that's Yiddishkeit, Einoid Movadai. And everything is just an extension of that, a manifestation of that. So then, fakert, if it's a chayk, it's much geschmacker. Less ego, better. Like in a good marriage, the less you understand your wife, the more geschmack it is. I'm serious. No, I'm serious. If you have a good relationship, yeah. If you have a miserable relationship, then even what you understand is nicht geschmack. But what you don't understand, mamish freaks you out. But if you have a good relationship, if you understand less, asach beser, much better. Huh? Habatalia, yeah. Yeah, because you can actually give something very real. Doesn't have to fit in with my expectations. That's what a relationship means. You're connecting to the other person. The less you understand, actually, the more you could connect to the other person. The more I understand, the more I'm connecting to myself. I'm not connecting to you. It works for me. It happens to work for you also. Very, very nice. Yeah, the Rebbe used to say in the Sichos that the world says that we should be zoiche to have a geschmack in chukim like we have a mishpatim. There's just like somebody who does a mitzvah al pi seichel has a geschmack in it. So you should have the schuz that even when you're doing a chayk, you should do it with the same geschmack in mishpatim. The Rebbe says the opposite. So we should be zoiche to have a geschmack in mishpatim, the same geschmack that you have in chukim. That even in mishpatim, it shouldn't become an ego thing. It shouldn't be a seichel thing. It should be the experience of dveikus. In other words, dveikus to infinity. So Mamela fakert, the moment you teufels, then the dibes geschmack is chukir tzanacha. Because it's not about what I understand, fine, you understand is good. On the contrary, the value of understanding is that the seichel itself becomes part of Ein Sof, not the other way around. So it's not reducing the relationship to my expectations and my ego. But for this, one has to surrender the whole conception of life as being separate, as being alone, as being broken, as being devoid of the being disconnected. If you can add, when he says it was a war over the spirituality, not a physicality, it means something even deeper. It means not a war on the spiritual, which is spiritual relative to physical, but it was a war on real spirituality. What does this mean? Everybody understands that seichel means ideas, is much more spiritual than physicality, materialism. Al derech ze be'avdam gufa, seichel legabe midis, hu kamei ruchnis legabe gashmis. Higher awareness, even relative to emotions, is more spiritual, because it goes to places that are less tangible, more aloof, more sublime. Had midis l'maylim shivasim abinyan. Midis by Hashem are called the 7 days of creation, chesed through malchus. It's the source for all the worlds until the physical. Even though over there's no gashmis in the midas, but there's the possibility. In other words, the reason there's physicality down here is because there's already room for it in the midas. The midas begin a process of otherness. Yeah. Moichin represents something that's beyond the world completely, like it says Torah is beyond the world. So in a person's life, you have things that are physical and you have things that are spiritual relative to the physical. You can't compare physical concrete action to emotion. Emotions are much less tangible, even though they're very real. And in emotions itself, you have deeper and deeper and deeper, and then you have levels of awareness, moichin, and higher levels of awareness, until you have very abstract ideas that are completely not tangible. So that's ruchnis legabe gashmis. Amna masha moichin im chinis ruchnis er is rak be'erech gashmis hamidas. But when you say moichin or ruchnis, it's only relative to the fact that midas are more concrete, and actions are even more concrete. Achal pia amr shemal chemes evanim haisel lo rak alinyan ha-seichel lo yalinyan ha-seichel shebetayra shal ze iskimu gam ha-yevanim ela al ha-kedusha v'elakuz shebetayra hadei ze milchama lo rak al b'chinas she ruchnis legabe gashmis ela al ruchnis mamash. Their milchama wasn't on ruchnis, which is ruchnis relative to gashmis. It was on pure ruchnis. That was the real milchama. So when it says in the Maimarim that the milchama of the Yevanim was on ruchnis, he says, like, understand what it is. It wasn't just that which is spiritual relative to physical. It was on the pure experience of ruchnis itself. And that's elokus. Not seichel, which seichel is also very ruchnis, but that didn't really bother them. The pure ruchnis, that's what bothered them. Not just seichel, which is only, it's more abstract than gashmi. But it's only more abstract than gashmi. If you're a wiser person, it's much more serious than a concrete thing. For a big chacham, the mitzias of seichel is much more stronger than the mitzias of a physical thing. It's like even an adult, right? You give a little kid a little fire truck, or a check with $1 million, and he'll take the fire truck. You give him an ice cream, or you give him a check, the check he'll tear up, and the ice cream he'll take. Why? Because in his world, this is a real mitzias. A piece of paper with a few numbers on it is nothing. When you get older, suddenly you compare a fire truck to a check of not even $1 million, but even $1,000. It's not the same. You throw away the fire truck. The check is not so exciting, but you understand it. And the deeper you go, the more we advance, what is reality at a younger, less mature age becomes insignificant at an older age, and a different reality takes over. Right? A person who's more sensitive, right? For one person, this type of food is so appealing and interesting. A person who's more developed, they don't even look at it. It's like, it's garbage. Even though it's there. What is reality is something much deeper, right? Much more real. That's how human development is. So what is ruchnius, what is gashmius? On one level, you have something that's deeper, ruchnius. But then when you go higher, that itself is considered gashmius. So he says the Yevanim, you could think that the Yevanim were perturbed by ruchnius. He says, no, there was a lot of ruchnius that they liked. Sophisticated things that are not so tangible, that you need a mind, and you need culture, and you need sophistication, that they can appreciate. They weren't just brute physical people. And that was why it was so tempting for the Jews. It was the first time in history that the Jews were being challenged by a culture that had spirituality. In other words, when you're competing with a culture that's just pure barbarism, it wasn't tempting for the Jews. Jews are not barbaric. It's very hard. They don't know. They don't have such a chush in barbarity. I mean, obviously you have exceptions, but generally speaking, it's a refined nation. It's an Am Chacham V'Noven. It's a nation that likes goodness and justice and the world to be a good place. Right? That's the DNA of the Jewish people and their whole education and value system. But the Yevonim posed a challenge because they did have higher interest, more sophisticated interests, things that are appealing. So he says that's the word. When you say their Melchama was on Ruchnis, it doesn't mean Ruchnis be'erech legashmis. That they didn't mind. What their Melchama was real Ruchnis. What's real Ruchnis? Elikus. Elikus is not sophistication. Elikus is not intangible. Elikus is not something wiser and deeper. Awareness lagabe emotion. Elikus is Ein Sof. Elikus you need bittul. It's not Ruchnis. You understand the difference? Elikus is not the finer. Ruchnis is spiritual stuff. Spiritual high is also called spiritual. It's not necessarily Elikus. Elikus is a nakuda of Ein Sof, of infinity. Elikus is all of reality. Elikus means that when you're touching it, you're touching all of reality. Oh, Adkan. Don't tell me you're touching you're not touching all of reality. It's a beautiful painting, if I get it. It's a nice culture, it's an interesting idea, it's a good philosophy, we'll talk about it. Again, we'll even debate it, I don't mind. But keep it within the realm of I'm in control. Elikus, you can't be in control. If it's Elikus, like the Baal Shem Tov say, Hashem Elokecha Eish Eichlo, Hashem is fire. With fire, either you stay away or you get burnt up. You can't put your finger in fire. It's not like sitting at the beach, you put your feet in the water and you get wet. That's good for water. Hashem Elokecha Eish Eichlo. Eish, don't put your finger in it. Either stay away and enjoy it from distant, but if you want it, it has to be kol kulai. Yeah, it's like chassidus. You can't sit back, okay? You could do it the first few times you come to the shir. But after a while, you sit back, it's an interesting idea. You'll see, when somebody has that approach, they're going to have to leave at some point. Because it's other other nish, like it's eish eichlo. You know, it's like half pregnant. How a woman, I want to be half pregnant. There's no such a thing. Either you're pregnant or you're not pregnant. Right? Like Eliyahu Hanavi said, either God is real or he's not real. They didn't understand that. In the morning you'll go to God and then you go to the Baal. What's the problem? What, it could be 50-50, no? It's not 50-50. If it's 50, even if it's 99, the Rebbe used to say, Vart, when I heard it, it was gewaldig. He said like this, MS is not 99%. If it's 99% MS, it's nicht MS. MS is only kulei MS. If it's 99% MS, it's sheker. You say, come on, this is 1% truth. This is 99% truth. No. This is 1% truth, so it's clear that it's a sheker. And this is 99% truth, so you can be deceived that it's MS. In a way, it's a bigger sheker, because it's 99% truth. If it's truth, it's truth. If it's not truth, it's not true. Don't. Yeah. I'm almost pregnant. Thank you. You know what I mean? I'm almost married. I'm half married. It doesn't work that way. Either you have a child or you don't have a child. I'm 50% the mother. I'm 50% the father. Really? What? 50% of your kid, you're a father for 50% of your kid? What, the part that you like? Till the nose? What does that mean? Yeah. When you say Ein Sof, it's not 99%, it's 100%. When you say you have an neshama, it's 100%. It's not. MS is MS. Now, in order to be able to have MS, you have to have MS. Did you understand what I just said? And the people are very cynical because they know that if you're talking about MS, it has to be full, it has to be complete. And a person will say, Ad Kan, I'm not doing this. Like, I'm not ready for this. Yeah, I'm not going to let go. And especially if you were hurt. Especially if you were hurt and abused by truth. So you have to be stupid to let go. Right? If you keep a distance and you say, no, I'll look at it, I'll examine it. Certain things I'll take into my life. It makes a lot of sense. I don't want to get hurt again. If a person has been hurt by a certain relationship or by a certain connection or by a certain commitment, It's good to keep a distance because we stay behind the wall. The challenge is that then even when you touch truth, you're not touching truth because you always remain protected. And truth is vulnerable. The only thing that's really vulnerable is truth. Everything else is not vulnerable because you could remain behind your walls and come out when you want to and take what you need to. So the Yevonim, essentially, their Milchama was against pure Ruchnius. They didn't have a problem with relative spirituality. That they didn't mind. But pure Ruchnius, what's pure Ruchnius? Pure Ruchnius is Elikus. Elikus means Ein Sof, infinity. I mean, Elikus means truth. Complete truth. Ein Oid Milvadai. That takes complete surrender. Not half surrender, complete surrender. Either it's real or it's not real. If it's real, it's full, it's complete. And in that sense, the war of the Yevonim is a very contemporary war. Because it's inside of us. Because the question is, how much am I ready to surrender my ego? Fully or not fully? It's a question everybody has to ask. It's very, very deep. And if it's an easy question to answer, you probably don't understand it. If it's an easy question to answer, it's very hard to understand. So that's what the Baal Shem Tov said, Hashem Elokecha Eish Eichlu. There comes a point where it's fire. Either I stay away, and I know I'm staying away, or if I want a relationship with it, there's nothing left in the ego. That's tough. I understand the person who says, I'm not coming close. There was a Jew, Chaim Potok. You've heard of Chaim Potok? Chaim Potok was a very big writer. He grew up as a religious Jew, then he became a conservative rabbi. He wrote a famous book called My Name is Asher Lev. And he wrote the Book of Light, The Chosen, yeah. He was a very, very big writer. He passed away a few years ago. I think he lived in Philadelphia. Very talented person, writer. So, I saw they once interviewed him. And he was very influential. He wrote, he influenced a lot of youth because he was a sophisticated person, intelligent Jew, well-educated. So he said in the interview, they asked him about his relationship to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So he said he used to come to Fabrengens a lot, but he never wanted to go in on Yechidus. He never wanted to meet him privately. So they said, why not? So he said, he heard from other people, he saw how influenced they were by the Rebbe. He was afraid that if he goes into a private audience, he's going to lose his objectivity and ability to criticize the Rebbe. He's going to become too drawn into his, as he put it, magnetic personality, and he's going to lose his distance. And he always wanted to remain on the distance so he can criticize him, he can analyze him objectively, and he won't be, completely consumed by the fire, as he would say. So that's why he never went on Yechidus. He only came off Fabrengen so he could watch a distance. That's what he said. It's a very interesting answer. So my brother told me that he was with him on a Shabbaton at Rutgers University years ago. I think Chabad of Rutgers or something. I think Rutgers University many, many years ago. And Chaim Potok spoke. And Chaim Potok was a very, he held from the Rebbe very, very much. But he had this, and he said this. He said that's why he never, and he was very proud of what he said. So my brother told me that he got up afterwards and he said, Mr. Potok or whatever, Reb Chaim, I want to ask you a question. I'm just asking, and it's not criticizing, I just want to know, be curious. And that is, if you would have been at the generation that left Egypt, and Moses would say, tomorrow morning we're going to Mount Sinai, and God is going to reveal himself to us, would you have gone to the mountain? Or would you have stayed away so you could remain objective forever about Judaism? And always remain a critic and a cynic. Maybe Judaism is not true because you weren't there. Which one would have you chosen? That was his question to him. So, he meant well. What he meant was, you need people to be able to be critical. If not everybody joins cults and nobody thinks for themselves. And in the world of Chaim Potok, it makes a lot of sense. You understand? But what doesn't make sense? What doesn't make sense is he never experienced truth. And I'm not saying this in a judgmental way because it's true for so many of us. It's not about him, it's about us. If you were at Maimed Har Sinai, in other words, usually to be objective is the best thing in the world. It's good to be objective. If you're going on a date with a girl and you're not objective, oy va'avoy. right? If you're already drunk the first date, you're not going to be able. It's very good to be objective in life. It's good to be critical. It's good to have distance. It's good to see, does this make sense? Does it not make sense? Is this true or not? That's until you touch the emes. Once you touch the emes, now if you're going to be objective, it's a death sentence. It's a death sentence. You think Moshe Rabbeinu didn't understand the value of objectivity? You think of Rabbi didn't understand the value of objectivity? You think the Baal Shem Tov didn't understand the value of objectivity? You think the Alter Rebbe didn't understand the value of objectivity? They got it. We got it. That's why you have to be objective, because if not, you can end up by Nimrod. You can end up as a shaita. You can end up by Pesiyam and L'chol Dover. Fools believe everything. Arum Yavin Dover L'Ashira. That's till you don't touch the emes. Once you touch the emes, now if you're going to keep a wall, it's like almost somebody's going to say, I love this woman or I love this man. We're crazy about each other, but I have to remain objective. So we're never going to get married. I'm always going to. Fine. You want to be a shaiti? You have to be objective. Once you touch something deeper, now if you're not going to open your heart, so what's life? What's life? Life is going to be, you're going to stand on the fence and be critical forever. Okay, nebach, fine. You want to do that, do that. You're not going to live. If you have a soul that's a chelik elekamima, and if it's taka einoid mulvade, don't you think you want to be part of that? Or you forever want to be closed off and live in a gullus and live in a prison and always say, but maybe it's a lie. Maybe it's a lie. And maybe it's a lie. And the only thing I could sell is being cynical. That's all I have in life. And some people do that, especially today in the frum world. A lot of sophisticated people, that's all they can do. They could sit on the fence and and I get it. They don't want to get hurt. They don't want to get hurt. You don't want to be in love and then get suddenly the person has a sword and they're going to kill you. So the Yevonim really wanted that everybody should just play it safe forever. If you play it safe forever, you're good. So he says that was the Milchama on Ruchnius. It's not Ruchnius relative to Gashmius. That doesn't bother them. You can go higher and higher and higher. I don't mind. The spaceship can explore more and more and more and more and more. But always Ruchnius relative to Gashmius. The core of Ruchnius, that Ein Sof, which is a Lakus, and that's the whole Nikud of Torah mitzvahs. Lashkicham Torah secha, lavurim mechukei tzeinecha. The dveikus in the Ein Sof, where there's absolutely no ego, but there's Ein Ed Movadi, that the Yevonim could not tolerate. Of course, that's what he said. The first Ruchnius is only called relative Ruchnius. It's not a piece, it's not a table, it's an idea. It's not a tissue, it's an emotion. Right? It's not something that a 2-year-old will appreciate. You need an artist to appreciate. It's a piece of music that it's not just a garbage piece of music from some, rock star who is high, but it's a piece of music that comes from the Chachamim Hagdolim in music. And there's deeper and deeper and deeper. There's the art kind of, there's wine, I'm not a wine connoisseur, so I drink wine, it's wine. But other people will drink this wine and they say, how could you drink it? I'm also not a coffee connoisseur. Rabbi Pinny Lipschitz, the editor of Yated Ne'eman, he told me that Netanyahu once came to visit him in Muncie, and he wanted a coffee, so he made him a coffee, Rahman al-Islam, one of these instant coffees, and he says, Netanyahu started to drink it, and he says, this is coffee? This is coffee? It's not even water, right? So you had to go get a brewed coffee, whatever. But many people enjoy this coffee, right? So I'm saying in everything, there's more, the less tangible, the more sophisticated, in every area of the world, even in food, right? There's fast food. It fills you up for 5 minutes. Some people look at that and they say, this is not food. This is called samamavas. Give me poison. So in every nekuda, there's more ruchni, but it's all be'erech gashmis. That the Yevonim don't mind. They're very sophisticated people. A lot of them are sophisticated. I'm happy that you have cultural sensitivities. But that's cultural sensitivity that doesn't take the person out of the place of real ego and self-centeredness. It's a spiritual ego, so it's more sophisticated. Lashkicham Torah secha. It's the Kedusha Torah. It's the Lakusan Torah. It's the Bittul of Torah. It's the Ein Sof Torah, which requires a completely different set of skill. It requires trust. It requires vulnerability. And it requires the complete surrender of ego to a higher truth that is completely beyond you. And you say, I don't even have to know that there's a reason. I don't need a reason. It's fine. It's not that it's chukim because you're smarter than me. No, you're not smarter than me. I don't need that. There's chukim because you're smarter. You know the reason. I don't know the reason. And then there's I don't need a reason. B'chlal. V'hinei gimel. Yeah, clear? Yeah, the olam is taifas dinyan.
Why is the emphasis against Torah rather than Shama?
Lashkichem Torah secha.
If all the Torah is concentrating on a Torah Elikim, right?
Torah secha, your Torah. Yeah.
Why do we say in Chanukah, just to move a generic question, why is the emphasis on meaning to hold that Torah is infinite and that we're part of that, you have to believe that you're in the Shama. It's something to do with
You're right. I think it's Haba Hatalia.
What's the voice seems to be about? It's a coming from Torah. I mean, just they could have said with people without spiritual entity, we're not in the Shama.
Right. I hear you. That's a good shaila. Why don't they focus on the person, the soul? So let's see weiter now. Siv Gimel. V'hinei inyan zeh she'yevonim eskim ala chachma v'seichel sheb'Torah mekol mekom yisnagdu al zeh she'Torah savaya. Now he gets a little sharper here. This inyan that the Yevonim agree to the chachma of Torah, the seichel of Torah. I just want to emphasize this. We just want to emphasize one nekuda here. I mean, it's probably obvious to you, but this statement can come from two places, this whole idea. It could come from a place of tzimtzum, of narrowness, what you might call cultishness, and it can come from the place of tachlis ha'emes. You understand what I'm saying? So you have to understand the difference. In other words, there's a person who believes because they're blind, they don't think. They can also say this. Fachap, kedusha, 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 kedusha. Everybody else is aviyah voice atuma. But that's really the worst type of ego, because it's an ego that comes from tipshus. I'm just blind. I don't think. I shut my mind down. I'm frightened to confront anything. So anybody who challenges anything, I just say you're from the Yevonim. You're machshamay v'zechraya aviyah voice hatuma. You're the worst of the worst. You're declaring a war against God because you're declaring a war on me, and I am God. So that's the exact opposite. That's where the ego is so scared and the person is so stupid that they turn God into their own tzimtzum, into their own katnas hamaychen. So I don't want you to confuse it because you have that mitzias. So I'm just saying here it's punkte hepech. It's the emunah that's not lower than seichel, it's higher than seichel. In other words, you can go through seichel, gesund hate. You could search and you could research and you could challenge everything. Not afraid. That's the difference. How do you know if it's a emunah lower than seichel or higher than seichel? A munah that's lower than seichel is frightened from a normal conversation. Because it's going to be a normal conversation, actually, I might see that I'm not normal. That I've sold my soul because I'm frightened, which also makes sense. It's a human need to belong. And it's a human need to feel that God loves me and that when we get to the next world, I'm going to be in paradise and you're going to be in purgatory. And that's part of my religious identity. And the more I could be convinced, the more geschmack I have in life. So we can appreciate that. Real emunah is not afraid of any conversation. It's not afraid of it. It's l'mayla min ha-seichel. It's not l'mata min ha-seichel. It's a big difference. L'mata min ha-seichel means it's inferior to seichel. And that's why there's certain people I will not talk to. There's certain conversations I will not have because they may trigger very deep doubts and then who knows what's going to happen to me. Here we're talking about much higher than seichel. In other words, yes, seichel is good and geschmack and there's no issue of ruchnis lagabe gashmis, and we should climb in that ruchnis. There's deeper and more subtlety and more subtlety and more subtlety. But after everything's said and done, there's a nekuda of bittul that doesn't come because you're in a cult. It actually comes the opposite, because you realize that every other experience in the world never allows you to actually touch reality. Like it says in Tanya, leis machshava tfisa bei. No machshava is going to grasp reality. So if you want to grasp reality, you have to let go of machshava. Not because you're afraid of thoughts. Thoughts are gewaldig. You should use your thoughts and grow with your thoughts. But there comes a point where thought becomes the greatest obstacle to experience ultimate truth. And that's when truth tells you, it's time to surrender. Because there's a certain place I can take you to. And then afterwards, you have to graduate me. Like I can't take you through a certain door. Machshava could only take you up to a certain place. And then a certain place I can't take you. Not because I'm afraid And not because I'm inferior. On the contrary, I've maximized all my potentials. But I have certain limitations. Seichel knows it has limitations, and therefore I can take you till here, and afterwards you need a different skill set in order to experience that. And that skill set is already called emunah. That's trust, that's vulnerability, that's the divine soul's experience. I just want to emphasize that it should be clear. It's a very important distinction to make. And how do you know the difference between this and this? I guess you know the difference. The emes sticks out. You see, it's not afraid of anything. Emes merits, it also stays. It endures 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. All that position, like nothing will stifle it. Doesn't expire yet. Doesn't expire. Emes merits titzmach. Verstehst? And you also have to be able to trust yourself. Like, you have to, the real truth doesn't create anxiety. The first type of truth creates a lot of anxiety because you're repressing things. You understand? Whenever you're dedicated to somebody with a lot of loyalty and it's creating anxiety, be careful. Why is there anxiety? Because there's a part of you that's not satisfied. In this type of real relationship, there's no anxiety. Because if you're touching ultimate reality, there's no anxiety. There's a bliss, there's a tainug. You always see a difference. Whenever you have to shut down voices, you have to convince yourself, and you're busy fighting with yourself, right? No, I'm not in a cult. I'm very authentic. Why are you anxious? Why are you anxious? And I'm also getting angry at other people, and people are triggering me, and I'm not trusting myself. These are all signs that there's repression happening. In real dveikus, in real emes, there's no repression. And if there's no repression, there's going to be very, very deep tainug, very, very deep bliss. But this takes a lot of avodah because you have to, there's grief involved, there's letting go of a lot of stuff, and there's also grieving the fact that the person, felt duped by a lot of things. So now let's see the next shtickle. Here it gets a little deeper. The fact that the Yevanim agree to Seichel, but they oppose the godliness of Torah, this comes from the fact of something, it comes from something much deeper. In Torah itself, you have these two parts. In other words, the Rebbe is going to say now that the Milchama of Yevanim, of Chanukah, really comes from a much more spiritual place. In Torah itself, you have these two inyanim. Al derech hamavur binyan Mitzrayim d'ulum hazeh. The Alter Rebbe explains about Mitzrayim, Egypt, Mitzrayim of Klippa. Mitzrayim doesn't begin with a physical Egypt and physical borders of unholiness. It begins with borders of holiness. Mitzrayim begins in Kedusha, and then it ends up in our Mitzrayim. Everything gets its nurture from holiness, even the Yevanim. Just like Mitzrayim doesn't begin with Mitzrayim, it begins with holy Mitzrayim. It begins with holy confinements, and from there you get to unholy confinements. The war of the Yevanim against Torah begins with the fact that there's something in Torah from which the Yevanim can get their energy. The Gemara says in Maseches Yom Adafayim Beis, no zacha nasis loy sam chayim, loy zacha nasis loy sam misa. If you learn Torah and you merit, the Torah becomes medicine of life. And if not, if you were in Zaycha, it becomes poison, medicine of death. This means when somebody learns, it could be in a way that the learning produces something that's antithetical to life. The Gemara says that it says in Yirmiyah, Alma of the Haaretz. Why did the land perish? Because they abandoned me. So the Gemara says they learned, but loy baruchu b'Torah tchila. They didn't make a blessing before the learning. Before you learn, there's a birchas HaTorah. This means there's something about birchas HaTorah that causes the galus. So this is already in learning itself. When it's loy zacha, when a person doesn't learn Torah with the zakos, with the refinement that Torah requires. So ultimately, from this came, after many levels, From this devolved the war of the Yevanim that they wanted to make from the Jewish people. They wanted that the Jewish people should forget about the one who gives Torah and the one who gives mitzvahs. In other words, this Milchama and Ruchnius. So it starts off not from the Yevanim, it starts off in Torah itself. In Torah itself, I could be a Yavan. Even though they fought against Torah, but their war begins from a much higher level. Like everything, it starts off in a more subtle place. And then it comes down in a very concrete place. That means every corruption that you see, even in the most brute way, it starts off from a much more subtle corruption in very edel places. Alter Rebbe writes in the Torah that he heard from the Maggid that machshava zaris of tzaddikim are poigim more than averis chamuris of rishayim. The alien thoughts of tzaddikim have a greater blemish, they create a greater blemish than sometimes concrete sins of rishayim. Why? The answer is because the thought of a tzaddik is plugged into higher frequencies of reality. And when you plug into higher frequencies of reality, it has a much deeper impact. You know what I mean? I'll give you an example. You have a war, so you have the soldier who's actually going to the enemy territory, right, and has to throw a bomb into a house. That's very serious. But what about the one who's running the war on a computer program, right? And he does something on the back end, right, which is going to cause all the missiles to get wrong messages where they have to reach. You understand the churban he makes? He just changed the letter on the back end. He's in a basement somewhere in Tel Aviv, nobody sees him. He's not confronting an enemy. He's in a very beautiful place. There's nice coffee. There's good air condition. Right? He's very protected. He's not in Gaza. He's not in Lebanon. He's just playing with the back end. He's changing an E for an S. But that can make a churban that the person who's actually confronting the enemy can also make a churban, but it's it's more limited. Here, you can destroy everything. So machshava zaros of rishayim, of tzaddikim, he says, are poigim more than averes chamuras of rishayim. Says in Lukat, he heard it from the Maggid. Yeah, because you're playing with energy that is very, very lofty. It's very, very sublime. So the Rebbe is saying here, the Milchemes HaYevanim doesn't start from Milchemes HaYevanim. It starts off in Yiddishkeit itself. When Yiddishkeit, in other words, within the Jews themselves, Bereshis B'Shvilat starts off within the Jews themselves. The Torah can be learned in a oifen that ultimately will give room for the Milchemes HaYevanim. Obviously, he's not saying that the one who's learning Torah in this way is a Yavan and wants to destroy Torah. Fakert, he's learning Torah. He may even want to be a big gadol, and he may even be very successful. He may be brilliant. But there's a tumah in his Torah. There's a sama mavas, which ultimately, after many, many, many levels, assumes a very concrete level of Mulchama. That's why the corruption in the subtle levels of Yiddishkeit is much worse than anything else. You understand what I'm saying? That's why Limud Hachsidus is so important, for the purity of it. Pasha the Kedusha and Tada. A person could be a Frume Yid and do everything, but there could be a lot, as we know, there could be people who are very religious, but there's a lot of corrupt things. Because the animal soul takes over. My learning could be with arrogance, my mitzvahs could be with arrogance. I'm not only talking about people who are doing holy things, but they're also doing abusive things. I'm talking even people who are not doing abusive things, but their holiness itself can give room for other people to do abusive things. Why? Because the holiness is not fully refined. It's not a bittul to the Ein Sof. So for example, right, you could tell a rabbi, how do you allow this corruption in your school? And he says, there's nothing I can do. What does that mean, there's nothing I can do? It's too powerful people. If I go out against it, all the people of money will stop supporting me, and therefore there won't be a yeshiva. So what do you see from here? This is that Yiddishkeit is contaminated in a very deep place. So I'm going to allow corruption to happen, even though I know about it, because I'm making cheshbonos. I don't believe Einoid Mulvade. I don't believe that there's a real God, that there's Ein Sof. I don't. It's working. There's a cultural system that's working. And this is not a person who's doing bad things. Faket, he may be a very nice person. I'm just giving an example. I don't know why this example popped into me. Because it's relevant, okay? It didn't pop in from nowhere. I'm just giving you an example. You have a person, yeah? He's a good person, and he's trying hard, and he's at Yiras Shamayim, but because his own Yiddishkeit is not fully worked out with true bittul to the Ein Sof, so therefore in his presence, he allows cockroaches to take over and do the most disgusting things, and he stays quiet. Huh? Because Yiddishkeit is only 99%, it's not 100%. If it would be 100%, there would be no room for this. It's like, do we worship the Baal or do we worship Hashem? Like, who do we worship? We worship child abusers or we worship God? We worship money or we worship God? Since when is money more powerful than God? He says, yeah, but who's going to cover the budget? You're going to cover the budget. It's a good question. The budget is a big budget. He has a big budget. I understand. And I'm not even judging, because I understand a budget is a budget. Somebody has to raise money, and the money doesn't grow on trees. But Afal Pikein, if he would be living with Chassidus, if he'd be living with Ein Sof, it wouldn't even be a shaila. Huh? Very good. I'm not saying there's no, of course there's nisyonis. That's why we become what we become. And you have to be empathetic and not judge. But a person has to know there's no substitute for emes. There's no substitute for emes. Emes is not 99%. It's 100%. And that's why there's a difference. You know, people are very weary of tzaddikim and rebbes and this, yeah. And there's a reason for it, because everybody, when you stop forgetting that people are people, and they have flaws, and you just start worshiping them, you could really start doing stupid things. Yeah. When you have a real tzaddik that's emes, it's a different inyan. You know, like it says in Tanya, you have tzaddikim who transform the nefesh of Bahamas. Yeah. You take a person like the Alter Rebbe, like the Baal Shem Tov, like the Rebbe. It's not pshat. Yeah, the Rebbe lived 92 years. The Rebbe spoke for 40, 50 years. You could hear it. 40, 50 years a person speaks, never said a word that's not Lashon Nakiya. Yeah. 90 years people spoke to him, couldn't hear a word of Rechilus or Lashon Hara, a bad word about a Jew. It's not, once in 50 years you're allowed to sin. Right? If you would catch the Baal Shem Tov once in 40 years saying Lashon Hara, it's not the Baal Shem Tov. It's a person, fine, who's a good person. When you're talking about emes, Hashem Elokecha Eish Oichlu, it's complete. There's no machshava dibura maisa that's not a merkava for Hashem. It's a different inyan. Once you see that, not to trust that, you have to be a shaita. Now you're depriving yourself from light. Till that point, you have to be skeptical. Everyone is flawed. When you see somebody who transformed themselves in that way, it's a different inyan, it's a different magnet. You understand what I'm saying? It's a different energy. And you can't compare it. It's not a comparison. It's a completely different inyan. And it always comes from pure honesty, pure scrutiny. You know, I get a lot of emails from people how their rabbis disappointed them. They would, by this Rebbe, by this Rav, by this Rosh Hashiva, for 15 years, they gave them their whole neshama. And then suddenly after 15 years, they see this, they see this. And what do most people do? They doubt themselves. And I understand it. They say, wow, I must be the crazy one. And the truth is, they're not. They're just seeing the truth. They're seeing that people are people. And people have flaws. It's not the end of the world. You have to trust yourself. You have to trust yourself. Don't delegitimize your whole self, because if you delegitimize yourself, you don't have a keli with which to connect to God. Because all you tell yourself is, I don't know, ich weiß gar nicht, I'm stupid. It's good to ask. In other words, I shouldn't trust myself to the point that my ego decides everything. It's good to ask and be humble, because maybe I am making a mistake. But when you see something once, twice, 3 times, chances are that you're onto something. You know, but for this all, you need to be able to confront truth all the way. And it's very hard for people, because we're afraid, how much will our religion survive if everything is exposed? Right? If everything is exposed today, the Isaac, if everything is exposed today in the Charedische Welt, how much of religion would survive? One thing I know, look at the Torah will survive if everything is exposed. If it's real emes, you're not afraid of anything. You could expose everything. I don't care. Tell me every story in the world. You could see everything because it's emes. So the Nekudah is like this. The Milchama of the Yevonim against Torah doesn't begin with the Yevonim. It begins in Kedusha. It begins in Kedusha from Torah that's missing Birchas HaTorah. It's Torah that's missing the Torah Secha, even in a person who's learning, who's not a Yavon, he's a good Jew. And that's Pshat the Milchama is on Ruchnis. What's that Ruchnis on Kimish? V'adei Klolos HaHefresh ben Ruchnis, L'gafshmi Yisuk HaMei HaHefresh ben Chayim Amavis Kipshuta. The real difference between Ruchnius and Gashmius is a difference between life and death. Why? It's explained in Chassidus. Moshe Rabbeinu says, see, I've placed before you life and goodness, and death and evil, and you should choose life. So the pshat is, what's pshat b'charta b'chaim? The Rebbe says, of course you choose life. Who doesn't choose life? You need Moshe Rabbeinu to tell you not to choose death. Every animal knows not to choose death. Every mosquito tries not to choose death. So pshat is like this. Hagash mi'shutachas pigei azman v'hu ha'iveh v'nifse there is inyan amavis. Mashenkin ruchnis shulamayla min azman l'shayich b'heder ha'chayim klal v'b'chinas chayim be'etzem v'zeh winyan zocha nasas lo'isam chayim. It's much deeper. Gashmius and Ruchnius is really, in everything in life, there's the life of it and there's the death of it. When you look at a piece of food, or you look at your body, or you look at anything, you could see the death of it and you can see the life of it. The death of it is the part of it that's ultimately going to die. In other words, the part of it that's going to die, it's dead now also. It just looks alive. You know, just like in food, you know, you look, it's Chanukah time, so donuts, right? You look at the donut, it's beautiful, right? It's appealing. But everybody knows what's inside of it. If you could just look at the system, you know, I don't mean to speak against donuts on Chanukah, chas v'shalom. I don't want to be ma'ived al hashman and be another Yevoni to talk against latkes. What? I won't ruin it, no. I did a kids program on Tuesday, so one of the kids wanted to know, what's my favorite type of donut to eat on Chanukah? Yeah, you heard the question. What's your favorite type of donut? One of the kids wanted to know. I was embarrassed to say I don't discriminate. My appetite is very diverse, but I said that this Chanukah I'm going to try to stay away from it because it's not healthy. The point is, you could look at something b'chitzonius. You know, you could take a puff of a cigarette. It's geschmack. If you open up, if you dissect it and you see what just went into your body, what just went into your blood, it's a different reality. The same is true as everything in life. You know, I could look at a piece of food and I could see the gashmius of it. That's the death of it. Not that gashmius is bad. It's not. Gashmius is divine as a keli for ruchnius, as a channel for divine energy. When you see the divine energy, that's the life of it. And that's the eternal part. So Moshe is saying in everything, I want you to connect to the divine life force and energy, not to the external aspect of it. The Gashmius is the part, he says, that's going to change with time. It's geschmack for now, and 5 minutes later it's meaningless. And that's how you know if you're touching the physical or the spiritual. The physical means you're touching something, its power is only right now. After a while, it's nothing. Ruchni is before, in middle, and after the bliss remains, because you're touching real energy that's forever. That's the difference. So in every nekuda in life, it could be physical, it could be intimacy, relationships. It could be eating, anything you do, anything you could, even yourself. Am I connecting to the part of it that's mavis, to the part of it that even now it's not alive, its power is just temptation, or I'm connecting to that which is chayim. So the difference of Gashmi and Ruchni is not if it's physical or spiritual. Physicality is also divine. On Shabbos it's a mitzvah to eat. We light a physical Chanukah candle. It's what you're seeing in it. Are you seeing in it the Torah Secha, or are you seeing in it only the hollowness of it? In every moment in life, I have to choose which one. And that's the choice between being a Yevani and being a Jew. The Yevani always wants the chitzonius of it. He doesn't want the pnimius of it. Lashkicham Torah Secha. That's what he says. And b'meila, Ruchnis is l'mayla min azman. If it's l'mayla min azman, it can't die. Because anything that's higher than time is not vulnerable and subjected to the tyranny of time. Death is a product of time. Right? You buy a car, after 10 years, it's dead. You buy a computer, after a few years, it's dead. You have a body, and after a few years, hopefully 120 years, it's dead. The Rabbeinu B'chaya says, Hatinik, the Rabbeinu B'chaya says, we start dying the moment we're born. Rabbeinu B'chaya says. When does death start? The moment you're born. When does the copy machine start dying? The moment you make a first copy. The moment you made the first copy, the moment your printer printed out the first page, it starts dying. It's going to take 3 years, but it starts dying. It's a little sad, but that's the whole point. Because the moment the first page was printed, the energy started to be depleted, just a drop. In 3 years, it's going to be finished. Right? Mashenkin Ruchni is l'mayla min azman, so there's no heder achayim. That's the vort. And b'meila, it's chayim be'etzem. It's essentially alive. And that's pshat. When you learn Torah with that Ruchnius, with the Torah Secha, it's nasaloi sam chayim. It's the medicine of life, because it's eternity. Loi zacha. If I'm connecting to the part of Torah that's not really alive, the part of Torah that's simply keeping me detached and just making me feel good about myself and giving my arrogance some stability, it's just some distraction, and that's why I'm learning, or guilt, or shame, or arrogance, or whatever it is, even if it's very, very subtle, It's Sama Mavis. I'm tuning in to the union of Mavis. I just want to learn this paragraph and then we'll take a break. We'll continue Monday. And that's why they can only light the oil when they found a jug with the seal of the Kohen Gadol. He asked, why do we need the Kohen Gadol? What's the game? You need it to be kosher. Normal years, when the Yevanim weren't allowed to go into the Heichel, even a Jew, a Yisrael, wasn't allowed to go in. Not only that, the Rambam says that even in Yerushalayim, you don't allow an idol worshiper to live there. So then you can have kosher oil that's regular. לכן היו צריכים להמשיך מבחינה עליונה ביוסר, ולכן הוא צריך להספח שמן מונח בחסמו של כהן גדול, כמודגש בנוסח התפילה, באמת עשו בן יוחנן כהן גדול, שזוהי בחינה של למעלה משתלשלוס. בחינס היחידה, שבחינה זו לא היה יוונים מחילם לטל מחס ושלום. When the Yevanim came into the Heichel and they contaminated the oil in the Heichel, meaning the Tumah reached all of the levels, even the level of Heichel, which represents a very deep, intimate space of holiness, the level of Kahuna, because only Kohanim go into the Heichel, and even over there they managed to bring in Tumah. So now you need to access a much higher space in holiness. And here you need the Kohen Gadol's energy, which is higher than Ishtalshlis. It's called Yechida, and that's the only part that the Yevanim can't be Metame. Kebevua devavua leslo. It says that an echo of an echo they don't have. The Mishnah says in Gittin, if you hear somebody in a pit, and he says, write a get to my wife, I'm going to die. So you could listen and write a get and she's divorced. In fact, the Gemara, maybe it was a shed. So he says you heard an echo. So he says maybe it was the echo. Maybe it was the echo of a shed. So he said it was an echo of an echo. And Shedim only have one echo, they don't have a double echo. Bevua devavua leslo. Frag dal Rebbe, what's pshat? So he says the voice itself is nefesh ruach neshama. The echo represents chaya, that's the makif. And Yechida is the bevua devavua. Klippe has nefesh ruach neshama chaya. Yechida they don't have. Yechida they don't have. Bevua devavua leslo. The echo of the echo, the makif of the makif they don't have. That's only kedusha. The Kohen Gadol represents Yechida. The holiest Jew going into the holiest place on the holiest day, which is Yom Kippur. So b'meila, when the Yevanim reach a level of tumah that even the Heichel becomes tameh, now you need a different level of kedusha, higher than ishtalshlus, higher than everything, to be able to find your tara. Just like in a person's life, as long as a person didn't experience, this is a very, very powerful idea, as long as a person didn't experience, I'll use the word trauma, developmental trauma, they don't have to find their Yechidah Shebenefesh, because their regular self is functional. The moment Timu Kal Hashmanim Shebehechel, the moment all your oil was contaminated, now if you don't find the Kohen Gadol inside of you, you'll never be able to find purity. Right? And that's the beauty of healing. The beauty of healing is that you have to go to a place that's much deeper than anybody else. Because as long as your regular self is functional, you don't need that. You don't need a Kohen Gadol's oil. Go get me good kosher oil from Rabbi Landau's Hechsher, or Badat's Eida Cheredis, or even OU Parav is Mirachkut. I could use olive oil from OU, it's Eichkut. I trust the Orthodox Union, it's fine. That's as long as the Yevanim weren't Metama, the Kal Hashmanim Shebehechel. The moment all the oil, even in the Heichel, which is levels of Kuna, that became Tameh, now only Yechida is going to be your savior. Your only savior is going to be that part that wasn't contaminated. And for this, you have to find your Yechidah Shebenefesh. And by the way, in parentheses, this may be, Al Pi Chassidus, one of the reasons that we go through so many things we go through, because it's the only way you could find your Yechidah. And then you have Chanukah. Then you have Chanukah, which is from the word chinuch. Now you could be a child again. You could educate yourself from new. Chanukah is Chanukas. Right? Chanukah means it's a new Beis Hamikdash. Now you can have it. Now you could build a new Beis Hamikdash. Till we don't go through that part, these things, we never touch our Yechidah. People ask, why did I have to go through all of this? Why couldn't I grow up in a more functional reality and everything could have been normal and blessed? And if it was gezavaldik, enjoy it. But the fact is, everybody, whoever knows what I'm talking about, knows what I'm talking about. When Timu Kol Hashmanim Shebehechel, without Yechidah Shebenefesh, you can't get anywhere. You can't heal. Because whatever you touch is tameh. Your religion is tameh, your God is tameh, your relationships are tameh. It's sad. Your God is part of trauma, your religion is part of trauma, your Yiddishkeit, your Chanukah is trauma, your Purim is trauma, everything is trauma. Even Haneris Halalu and Mois Tzur Yeshuasi is trauma. There's people, even lighting the candle is associated with pain and anguish because they could still feel the mood in the house and what happened after the Chanukah lighting, etc. There was a woman who wrote to me this year that I gave a speech before Purim about Esther and Achashverosh, what happened over there. So she told me how healing it was because for her, her molester molested her while they read somebody used to come to read the Megillah for the family. And he knew that those 20 minutes of reading the Megillah, nobody's going to go away because you can't miss the Megillah. So that's when he took her to her room and he did what he did every year on Purim. So this menuvel, you understand, he used the Megillah and he knew everybody's going to be there at the Megillah, nobody's going to leave, so nobody will check on her. And that's when he did what he did. So she told me, for me, Purim and the Megillah is the worst of the worst. This is Pratimu Kol Hashmanim Shebehechel. You have the Yevanim, they go into the holiest places like the Megillah, Purim, Chanukah, and that's what they're metama. So there's no hope l'chayra unless you find the Pach Echad Shel Shem and Sheyichasam B'Chesam Shein. That's what the Rebbe says. The Kohen Gadol represents the Yechidid, the Kohen Gadol inside of you. You couldn't just be a jug of oil that had a hechsher. Hechsher doesn't work. The whole hechsher by you is wounded. You have to find the Kohen Gadol, the Yechidid Shebenefesh. The Yechidid Shebenefesh is taka not wounded. That's what he says. Ubepashtas harei ze inyan ha-mesiras nefesh, she'amdu al nafshim l'mneisha yechalashim u'ma'atim shezeh mitzad b'chinas ha-yechida. Yetoif is the word. It's a hafladik word. So the jug of the Kohen Gadol, it's not just technically. The Kohen Gadol happened to have a little mine of kaminu. Yeah, Kohen Gadol, stama kosher oil. It represents the whole victory of Chanukah. When the Yevanim, they bring in tumah to those places of Yiddishkeit, so you must find one jug that's indestructible. And that's what the Kohen Gadol represents. That's what he says. Literally, it expressed itself in the war. How could such few people fight a crazy army? You got to be crazy. Only in Yechidah Shebenefesh. Mitzad Yechidah Shebenefesh, you say it's not possible any other way. You're right, it's not rational. But it's not that it's not rational because they were crazy. It's not rational because it was higher than rationality, because it's Yechidah. Sometimes you're going to go to war, not because logically it doesn't make sense, you're right. But the Yechidah Shebenefesh says there's no other option. And then there's different levels of success, because it's not a success that's based on, the scientific calculations of the many versus the few. So the big miracle here is that they went to war. The fact that they were ready to go to war. Why are you going to war? You're going to lose. You have to be normal. If you have two people wrestling 1,000 people, you're not going to win. Why are you going to war when you know you're going to lose, al pi teva? The answer is, the moment Yechidah Shebenefesh plays the main role here, there's a different cheshbon of how you live your life. There's certain things it's not shaykh otherwise. It's a different energy, and when that comes out, then David is going to defeat Goliath, because Goliath is much stronger, but he doesn't have Yechidah. And Yechidah is stronger than everything, because it's Yachid, it's infinite. That level of Mesiras Nefesh is a different type of Mesiras Nefesh. It's the ultimate truth, and it doesn't come with anxiety. It comes with clarity. That's how you know. This is not because you're a crazy warrior who's a Meshugana. You understand the difference? Yechidah is not a Meshugana. Yechidah is very calm. There's a coherence. You're touching a place where you're touching Elikus. You're touching the Creator. So there's a certain clarity that this is my mission right now, and this is clearly what I need to do. That was the gift. They touched that place and they knew exactly what they have to do. Once they knew what they had to do, they did it. It wasn't because they were Hefker Jungen, they were going on suicide missions. That wasn't the Vart. This is also the connection to the previous Maimon Yutas Kislev. The Alter Rebbe said the pasuk Pada b'shalom nafshi mikrovli. That's when he went out of prison. Shadei avodah shemitzad b'chinas yichida showinyan mesiras kol ha'etzem l'may legam mesiras haratzon azayin is bata legam nimitzias hamenagid was nasin in the Pada b'shalom dafka. How could you release my soul from war with peace? Pada b'shalom nafshi mikrovli. It says in Tehillim. The answer is when the avodah comes from yichida, which is that your whole etzem is dedicated. It's even deeper than your ratzon. It's the whole etzem, the whole essence. So then there's no opposition. The moment there's no opposition, there's pada b'shalom. So you have here a very fascinating paradox. When you go into a place of yichida, it's not like there's an opposer, and I have to ask myself, is it worth it? In that space, there's no opposition. There's no other option. Because it's only one. In that place, there's no other option. So the clarity is complete. It's all-consuming. It's not like you're an opponent, and now I have to figure it out. Do I have the resources to oppose you? Do I have the resources to win? Mitzad Yechidish Benefesh, there's no opponent. There was never an opponent. You know exactly who you are, huh? Yeah, but not there's no cheshbonis because you're not using your seichel and you're being stupid. There's no cheshbonis because it's a place where there's such clarity of what my mission is and who I am that the menaga doesn't have a tfisis makam there. In Mitzad Yechidish Benefesh, there's no klippa. In other levels of the soul, there is opposition. There's light and there's darkness. The question who's going to win. Over there's no darkness. If there's no darkness, it's very clear what you need to do. So maybe that's what they did. So that's the Pach Echad Shel Shemen, the physical jug of oil that they discovered was a reflection of the spiritual jug of oil that they discovered. They discovered a jug of oil inside of them that was Chasam B'Chesama Shel Kain Gadol. But maybe physically they also discovered a physical jug of oil. Okay, we'll stop here. We still have to get back to the Mai Chanukah piece. That's going to be later in the Maimer. So Shabbos I'm here, but this Maimer will continue Be'ezer Hashem Monday morning. The minyan only finishes at 8 here, so we'll learn at 8. Alichte Chanukah, Freiliche Chanukah, Lustige Chanukah.
So if the gods of God would know everything that's going on, but everyone would understand IFS, would that be Mashiach come?
It's part of it. It's one of the parts. One of the parts. When the real self comes out, right, and it could soothe all the parts, and the parts don't control us, but rather the real self is in the seat. So that's an internal redemption. That's internal redemption, you're right. That's a geula pnimis.
Everyone else, we would be able to understand their parts and why they're doing what they're doing, so there would be an acceptance, for, not just for ourselves, but for everyone else.
Right.
We would understand them.
Yeah.
Then we wouldn't judge them. It's like, oh, right? Myself, my wife, and my kids, I understand why they're doing, and it makes sense.
Well, we can, like you're saying in IFS, when you can appreciate the parts, then you don't have to become overwhelmed by them. You could see there's different parts. They're each trying to defend and protect and do their role, and we can have empathy and hold space. And equally important, they don't have to be in the driver's seat. They don't have to control us, And slowly they can be unburdened from the need to be able to pose all these threats. That's the idea that when you touch your Yechidish Benefesh, your core, so everything falls into place. It's like, it's not a struggle. It's not like there's me versus another part of me and who's me. It's very obvious this is me, and this is just a fictional self that's maybe powerful, but it's really fictional. And it just sat in the driver's seat because it didn't know who it was, and I didn't know who I was. The moment you know who you are, it's very obvious. Why are you going to step away from that? So the moment you have Yechidah, there's no menaged, there's no opposition anymore. It's just everybody playing their own parts, trying to do the best they can in order to protect you and defend you. But you see them for what they are. You could wave to them. You can have compassion for them. You can give them a hug. You can make an appointment with them if they need an appointment. But the bottom line is there's no real opposition anymore.
And yesterday you shared that part 2 days ago. That's like the 7 fat cows and the 7...
So Yosef, the idea in the women's class was that Yosef has the ability to put everything together. He's not afraid of any part because he realizes that every part is just there to bring you to your infinity. And if every part is there to bring you my infinity, I don't have to be afraid of it. On the contrary, it's an opportunity to work it through, and then you reach yourself. So Yosef is not afraid of famine and of plenty. It's all part of it. Could you bring also from those tables? Your name is Yosef?
But even from what you said, I'm a Bunam Yosef. And I always say, Evan Marshall,
very nice. Nice.
And I always thought it was the symptoms.
Very nice.
That was really the trauma. That's the Evan Marshall.
Yeah.
And I didn't grow up from, and I always thought that I was made the way I was. The biggest pain when I started doing this work was a couple of years ago, when I came to the realization that I was made into that. I was formed
Wow.
into that was the most.
Yeah.
I used to always say, oh, so Hashem made me like this.
Yeah.
But you mean that this was done to me?
Yeah.
You said in last week's shir, when you brought up with the Ish Mechor and the Gemara in Tainus, I was saying, they say go to the...
Lech le'uman sha'asa'ani.
Right, so everyone always translates it as go to Hashem. But Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe
Shimon.
Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Shimon was... His actions, his guy, even Torah, he brought Eliyahu Navi to be this person.
That's what Tosfos says.
So, right, and Rash, right. Therefore, who's the Uman? Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Shimon was the Uman. Go to the one. Look what your actions caused him to become like that. Look within yourself, because he's the one who created the. I thought maybe we could look at.
I hear. Very nice. Very nice.
Thank you so much.
Lechem Shalom. Was Tosfos given? Every share is a share for you. Which share is not a share for you? Oh, you Shekayach. Okay.
Actually, my English birthday today, but I
Mazel
came
tov.
from 5 towns.
Happy birthday. You came from the 5 towns?
I've been listening since
Okay.
probably the beginning of the year. I've been listening.
What's your first name?
Yosef Siegel.
Your last name Siegel? Bruchim Abayim.
From JSS.
Bruchim Abayim, welcome.
I've been listening.
Okay, we have a lot of guests. You came from the 5 towns. You came from New Jersey. Which city? Bergenfield? Bergenfield? West Orange. Okay. Huh? Yeah. Slach Rabbi. Was macht er? A lustig in Chanukah. Yeah. Oh, gewaldig, mazel tov. Okay, Chaf Hey today. Kuf your test, the first half. Ashrei Smimei Darach.
The Gemara, I don't remember. The Gemara says, Rebbe may be sitting in the Arlonic, and he goes like this. He's like, he's a Krishma in the middle of the shir, but just like this, he just finished. I was thinking of that when you.
Yeah. Kabbalah Sa Malcha Shemayim. Kabbalah Sa Malcha Shemayim.
The first time ever came that kind of real to me.
Nice. Yeah. Heavy Yadaval upon of, yeah. Yeah. I saw the clock and I'm like, oh, I was planning to finish earlier, that's why, and then I realized. Okay.